gonna do straight. I don't know, Frank Sinatra. No, Frank Sinatra tune.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Steve Dickison, poet and writer, was raised in northern Minnesota and since 1983 has lived in the San Francisco Bay Area. He directs the Poetry Center and American Poetry Archives at San Francisco State University and teaches writing at SFSU, as well as writing and literature at California College of the Arts. Editor-publisher of the Small Poetry Press Listening Chamber since 1994, co-editor with David Meltzer of Shuffle Boil.
Shuffle Boil.
Shuffle Boil, an occasional music magazine from 2002 to 2006. Poetry includes Disposed, Post-Apollo 2007, and Wear You to the Ball. Performed 2009 as a collaboration with new music composer Bill Deeds. He lives in San Francisco.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to introduce you all to David Henderson, and then we're going to have a conversation. And David, a good amount of the introduction I think will emerge also in the conversation. So, David's books as a poet go back to Felix of the Silent Forest, which was done in 1967 by the Poets Press, which is Diane DePrima at the time. An introduction by Mary Baraka, Leroy Jones, and beautiful, beautiful book. Brett Romer, I happen to have a weird family connection with Brett Romer. It's odd, yeah.
He's a cool guy. He's a cool guy. The Mayor of Harlem was published in 1970, De Mayor of Harlem from Dutton. And beautiful book with the painter Joe Overstreet on the cover. And I think part of what we're going to be doing today is maybe talk about some of that scene of what the New York scene involved with the poets, the painters, the musicians communicating with one another on a regular basis. The Low East followed that, which was published in California by North Atlantic Books in Berkeley. David has spent a lot of time on the West Coast as well as in New York City. And Neo California then is a large collection that came out from North Atlantic in 1998. So he is also the author of Excuse Me While I Kiss the Sky, The Life of Jimi Hendrix, which has been revised through multiple editions, and he loaned me his copy the other night so I could read some of the revisions. And included in many anthologies. I brought this one along. It's called You Better Believe It. And kind of as an example of what was being done in the 70s, this is a totally international anthology of black writers. That kind of focus is, maybe it's coming back a little bit. Alison Hedgecock, who's a Naropa person, has recently done an anthology of Native writers from across the Americas, which is, a fantastic thing to see happening. And this was done by a really interesting gentleman, a Dutchman who lived in England named Paul Bremen, who published many black writers from the United States. Little beautiful pamphlets, Ishmael Reed's first book of poems, and a lot of work done by Paul Bremen. So David was born in Harlem in 1942, and I think one of the questions that I wanted to start with is how did the Hendersons get to Harlem? How did that happen?
Well, let's see. In 1900, 6 brothers, Henderson brothers, came from Orange, Virginia, to the Hudson Valley. It's like Beacon, Poughkeepsie, Wappinger, Newburgh, and they settled there. So that's since 1900. My family's lived there, the Hendersons, and and pretty much in Beacon, where my mother and father were married. So that's how they got there.
And then the Harlem movement took place.
Beacon is about an hour and a half drive away, which means that if you live in the metropolitan area, there are places in the Bronx that take longer to go to than Beacon, or Philadelphia takes an hour and a half.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a suburb, a far out suburb. So there was a lot of back and forth, in other words.
Yeah.
But my aunt lived with us, lived in the same building, in the same floor we lived in for a while, and they just went back and forth between Beacon and Harlem.
Yeah. any kind of musical practices or literary practices in the family?
You know, I have to say that none that I know of, but of course the only family I know from the Hendersons was, you know, my father and his siblings, and none of them were, you know, in that business.
Yeah.
And then the other people who lived in Virginia,
Yeah.
I only met a couple of times, and I didn't really get a chance to get the family history.
Right. So I think one of the things you do so beautifully in the Hendrix book is to establish like the musical background that Hendrix was born into, you know, and a family of entertainers really that had migrated and been up in that Seattle area, you know, and so, you know,
Yeah,
it's interesting.
his grandparent, his grandmother, I think, or father. Well, one of his grandparents, yes.
Yeah, was a dancer and entertainer, a traveling entertainer.
Yeah, and one of those black plays turn of the century, yeah.
Yeah. So, in Felix of the Silent Forest, there's a terrific poem called where is it at? It's Boston Road Blues,
Mhm.
which tells the whole story of a kind of doo-wop milieu, singers, and you were in a band, a quartet called the Star Steppers.
Yeah, that's what we were called. Yeah. It's kind of a silly name. But, you know, we sang, you know, a cappella with ear, you know. And we did pretty well for what it was. And our manager was, there were several managers. And I was going to high school at the time. And so I could get out of high school. I had a note. But our managers were former members of the group, The Chords. And The Chords recorded Shaboom. And Shaboom was a big hit, but it was covered by the Crew Cuts.
Life would be a
Hit.
dream.
Hmm?
Life would be a dream.
Yeah, the Crew Cuts.
Take you up to paradise. So-
Yeah. Oh, why isn't there a microphone? Anyway, who's the technician? You know. Anyway, I'll speak as loud as I can, but of course, it'll be more like a play than an interview. But that's okay.
But Boston Road Blues kind of tells the story of that whole milieu of these singers in that part of the Bronx, South Bronx.
Yeah, it was the Bronx, and we gigged in the South Bronx and the Northern Bronx, and you know, in my high school there was a couple of other very good groups, and who had records, stuff like that. You know, it was like, yeah. So I mean, we gigged and we were pretty popular. It was difficult because we didn't have a clue what we were doing.
Yeah.
And had no advice, musically or professionally, about how to carry on this enterprise in the music business. You know.
Yeah, it's interesting that part of New York because that's where, like, legendarily, at least hip hop comes up. You know, not so long after. You know, like in the. I mean, really, you know.
Well. Pretty long after.
Yeah. Well, you know, like we used Jeff
Fairly
Chang's
long
book,
afterwards.
Can't Stop, Won't Stop, in a recent class that I was teaching. And, you know, he starts dating things around the late 60s.
Yeah,
you know,
okay.
when some of the Jamaicans were coming over and playing dances and some of the youth gangs were making music, you know. And so he sees that as the local roots. Right out of that South Bronx neighborhood.
Okay, I could see that, yeah, because I make a point that, you know, I could sing bass. I could sing three parts, bass, baritone, and second tenor. But I sing bass a lot, and the bass, the a cappella bass that we used to do in hallways a lot, especially in the project, because they have this great echo, and this, you know, so you could really hear it until we get chased out. But the bass of the doo-wop became the bass in hip hop, as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, you know, the bottom.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Did you have a hit?
no, man, no, we barely had a record that was. The lead singer sang it, and then the Chords sang background. It was a stupid song. It was embarrassing, and because it was a song written by much older guys about a subject that a teenage group had no business singing.
Yeah.
So these guys, I hate to talk about. I'm not talking bad about the chords because they were great, and the shaboom. If you ever hear the shaboom by the chords, it's just the greatest song you ever want to imagine. You can understand why the Crew Cuts covered it, But Pat Boone covered Fats Domino, and it goes on and on. Gail Storm covered Little Richard. Mm-hmm. She was a TV star. It was just a bizarre time. But the chords, they were still trying to get back in the business. And one of the guys in the poem, one of the guys in the chords wrote a song called "Let the Little Girl Dance." Let the Little Girl Dance. And he sold the song for $100 on Tin Pan Alley, right, the Brill Building, and it was a huge hit. And we were just destroyed, I mean, this guy could have, he could have been rich, and he didn't have anything. And they had a white Cadillac that was kind of broken down, and and they had to, they wore their hair in Marcel's, which is that, it's something where they try to approximate, I guess, some Italian black-haired guy with waves in his hair, shiny hair, brilliantine or something. But it was just a strange ritual. So because if you couldn't keep getting your hair just to do this fairly often, then it got bad looking after a while.
Yeah.
And it was hard to do yourself. So
Yeah. Well, in the
Marcel.
Hendrix book, you talk about at a point he's afraid of losing his hair because it's been treated so much. It's like,
well, there were other reasons.
Yeah.
But one of them was that I would think that also he had become a star, and those kind of things can be worrisome at times.
Yeah, stress.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the hungry public.
Yeah. Where'd you go to high school?
And I went to Gompers, Samuel Gompers, in the South Bronx. I wanted to be a engineer. That's where Grandmaster Flash went to high school, and and they did all this stuff. And then later I went to I went to Gompers, and then I just kind of took the test and got out of high school.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't, not a GED. I got a diploma, but
Yeah.
I didn't go much after the sophomore year. I was exploring Manhattan, especially downtown.
Yeah. So you eventually make it down to the Lower East Side. How'd that happen?
I went to the new school to do a writing course, and there's a very kind professor or writer named Louis Vacek, who this was a very kind, very nice guy. So everyone loved him, and I hung out with some guys who wrote. One was a journalist, and one was a guy who was writing novels. Beautiful guys, and we went to hang out in the area to hear people read poetry, And one of the places we wound up was at the Le Dume Go, where all these beatniks used to go, ne'er-do-wells would sit up in there with Mickey Ruskin, who would later become a very famous restaurateur, but at the time he was a coffee shop owner. And he had a black partner named William Patterson or something, but he was a playwright. He became a playwright. So they both kind of moved on, but at the time, there was a Monday night reading at the Le Dume Go where it was a place to go. And that's where I met Calvin Harrington, who was very much a mentor in a lot of ways. We never thought of it that way, but who would go on to do Umbra from that, to join the group called itself Umbra.
Yeah. So Calvin Harrington, who else was in that early circle that founded this magazine? Or, well, it wasn't a magazine at first. It was the Society of Umbra.
No, right.
Yeah.
Well, Tom Dent was the guy who founded it. He was from New Orleans.
Yeah.
His father had been a university president of Dillard. And so he was a kind of a upper class black guy. And Ishmael Reed was in the group. a fellow named Askia Muhammad Touré took the Muhammad out of his name. It used to be Rolling Stones, a very good poet still living in Boston. Lorenzo Thomas, Brenda Hicks, Amara Hicks, who was married to Calvin Hicks, who had been a part of a group before that included Archie Shepp and Leroy Jones, called On Guard. So we had some connection with them, but we never met Leroy at that time. He was like a star. He's like a superstar of the downtown. You know, he was like.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, well, the New American Poetry came out in 1960, and he was a part of that. And he was having a book from Grove Press, did lecture, and etc. You know?
Yeah, he did that avant-garde anthology. He had the plays. You know, so he was always often quoted, and brilliant guy. So, but he would always use Negro. You know. And we said, what is he talking about? No, so very quick in Umber, we disavowed the use of Negro because it's just a ridiculous, you know, to name a whole swath of people from a whole continent one stupid name, you know, even if it means black in Spanish, it's still stupid. Anyway, so we had huge debates about this because there were some people who were I don't even know how to explain because so some people who of lighter hue, who for maybe centuries in some cases, their families had tried to cultivate their light-skinnedness so that they would have more privilege in society. They all of a sudden will have to be called black, and some people couldn't deal with it at first. But it's amazing what happened. And there's a guy named Ord Coombs who was a journalist, wrote in the New Yorker a very early piece, New York Magazine, and he interviewed a lot of black people about this before it really took hold. So some people say, well, I'm not black, I'm of a coffee and cream color, you know. They were kind of saying, but,
yeah, Ellington used to talk like that a lot. You know.
Well, it's a thing of the 50s, and it was a big thing. I grew up in Harlem, you know, until we moved to the Bronx, and that was a thing. It was a thing. But starting with that era of the civil rights movement and the black thing, it changed. And so to me, that's the biggest thing Umber did, was because we debated this thing and fought about it. Then we would go out into the suburbs, not a part of Ted Jones's Leonard Beatnik, but we were something else. And we would go to people's, we'd get invited to read, you know, and we'd come as a group, and so we were a mixed group. Although it was a Black Writers Workshop, we had white people and Latino, Puerto Rican people in our group as well, you know. Because we lived on the Lower East Side. They're our friends, you know.
Right.
And they understood exactly what we were doing. I mean, if someone's your friend and you explain to them what you're doing, they usually understand it. I mean, you know, they're your friend, they understand it. So there was no problem. But some of the black nationalists thought that we should be solely black and return to Africa, you know.
Yeah. Well, speaking of naming, how did you arrive at the name Umbra?
Well, there's another poet named Lloyd Addison.
Oh yeah.
Had a poem, and who Paul Bremen published.
Yeah. He
had a poem, very, very advanced poet. Had a poem called "The Umbra and the Aura," and it's just a very beautiful poem, and we loved it, you know. And so we just got a hold of that term.
Yeah.
And then an artist named Tom Feelings made a cover for our first, what we called then a magazine, that had these different shades of gray and black in the figure of a man making a cry. And so that was a very effective first cover. And that was Tom Feelings, who was also part of the group, who went on to become very well known as a illustrator and do books, not graphic novels, but books that were drawn. I don't know what to call them, but some were children's books, some were just artistic type books. You know. But that's what Umbra came in, and then
Yeah, one of the people that I ran into, I was in Chicago in the winter, and there was that AWP conference with 9,000 people, writers, and I was in a room, a panel on black women fiction writers, and this woman spoke up from the audience, and Julie Patton recognized her, and her name's Rashida.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
Rashida Ismaili Abu
Yeah, yeah.
Bakr.
Yeah.
And she writes about this scene on the Lower East Side too. There's a little memoir that she wrote that's online. It's quite nice.
Gee, I never saw it.
Yeah,
Spent
I'll
time
show
on
it to you. Yeah.
Very interesting woman, yeah.
Yeah, she came from West Africa, was married to a student, and but she writes about women in the circles of writers and such. So yeah.
Yeah. I have to tell you, I have no recollection of her, but that doesn't mean anything because it was a huge group that jammed themselves into Tom Dent's apartment, you know, and so there were a lot of people there, and so I just, you know, but she came with Tom Feelings, when I did a oral history of Tom Feelings, and Tom recognized her, you know, and of course she came with him, so I'm sure she was there. I just didn't, and this bothers me, I don't have a memory of her, but she is a really important person. We just had a poet from South Africa come through named Willie Cognestelli, who was around in the 60s, from ANC, from, you know, at the same time during the civil rights movement and the anti-apartheid movement. So this guy is really important. Yeah, I mean, he was a part of both of these things. And he gave us a picture of South Africa today that was just so sobering. It was amazing. But she set the whole thing up, cooked the dinner, invited the guests, had it videoed, you know, so I mean, she's a phenomenon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Terrific. You know, I brought out our Poetry Center file on David, and you know, it's like there's some embarrassing photos from, not necessarily, there's some very nice photos that we can look at later that are up here on the table and such. But one of the things that, where did it go? That there you go.
Let me look at that. Oh.
What we saw when you came in.
I know where this is at. This is at. Remember the film that they did for Al. I think it was for Alan. What are they called?
What year?
I think 70. Oh God, the Muses Are Heard or something at the Greek Theater, and it was what was it about the Beats or something. I don't know.
And that's what this reading was.
That was reading at the Greek Theater in Berkeley, which is outdoors, you know,
enormous audience.
Yeah, it was like amazing.
Yeah.
Quite intimidating coming from East Village. I'm sorry, what's it called?
Yeah, so one of the things I found in this folder was an article that you wrote on oral poetry in the 1975, you know. Not that I'm not going to ask you to remember what you wrote at all or even much about it, except one of the things that you say in there is the importance of poets talking to painters and musicians, and how that is really vital to poetic culture, you know. And so I wanted to ask about some of the painters maybe that were involved in the Umbra scene.
Yeah, well, you know, we used to have these painters, and I'll name them in a minute, but we used to have them we had benefits, and we would have the musicians would play music, and like Cecil Taylor and Archie Shepp and Bill Dickison would play this avant-garde jazz. And I swear to God, people would dance. And they were playing all this crazy music, and people would just get up, and they would dance anyway. It was just hilarious. But we'd have the painters make posters. And of course, and we put them out, and they would immediately be stolen, right? Because they were one-of-a-kind, beautiful pieces of art, right? But it would be Gerald Jackson, Joe Overstreet, who did the cover to The Mayor of Harlem, Jack Whitten, I think I'm saying Joe Jackson, Ellsworth Osby, a whole group of black painters who lived downtown, and who were kind of after the Spiral group that Romare Bearden and some others had put together. So they
because he was downtown in the same neighborhood.
Well, Romare, yeah, well, he had a studio on Canal Street. I guess and it wasn't Soho. It was right above the Three Roses. They used to have this black bar in Canal Street. You know. Of course, because Canal Street used to be part of a black neighborhood back when Dickens was around, because that's where the African burial ground is. So, I mean, black people lived downtown in Manhattan longer than they lived in Harlem, actually. But anyway, Romare Bearden lived on Canal Street, and there were a whole bunch of other artists black artists who lived downtown, and writers and musicians, because it was very cheap to live there. You could get space, you could make noise, and somehow that has to be socially engineered into the society, because that was, but that's part of what I'm afraid of in terms of this generation, is that that I think it's very unique what happened in many ways. But we dealt with painters, but so did the New York School. I mean, that was not something that was unique. That was happening in the whole region among all kinds of groups interacting with painters and musicians, and also dancers, man, who were great. There was this guy Walter Gutman. Remember Walter Gutman? He was a stockbroker, and he had a house in the village, and he sponsored these dancers, and he liked female rustlers too, big women. He was a crazy guy, but he had these great parties. You could drink all you wanted, and they had these dances, and it was just wonderful. So we hung out.
Yeah. So, thinking about like Romare Bearden, I'm wondering, among, say, you younger guys that are writing and making music, making, art, what about, interactions with the older folks? Like Langston Hughes shows up a lot in your work as a someone that's called forth.
Almost everybody in Umbra knew Langston independently. I would be Calvin Herrington. Raymond Patterson was also part of that. Tom Dent, they knew Langston, and I got to know Langston. He was a really cool guy. Now, Langston and Gwendolyn Brooks made it a point, because Gwendolyn Brooks had been helped by Langston. They made it a point to encourage young poets, and it was a conscious thing, and he did it, and he followed through on it. So he would come down to visit us at Tom's house, and then he gave us his mailing list. And I'd visit uptown in his place, and this guy, he had several secretaries, and he would receive people during the business hours, or during the daytime, but he never stopped working. So he'd give you a card and sit down, and he'd be typing on something, and then he'd talk for a minute and smoke a cigarette, then he'd go back and somebody else would get this, and he'd sign some books, and they would just be doing it. So he had incorporated the whole thing into his way of life, and he stayed up, wrote through the night, and got up early in the morning, and did his, when I went to sleep, got up did his chores, and then went to sleep, got up, and then began working in the afternoon, and worked, a shift with his writers, and then worked alone.
And he was in his 60s at that point.
Well, yeah, when I met him, he was in his 60s, But I have to say, I saw Jesse Norman did a production of his Ask Your Mama, which I believe that's the book that really got me interested in writing poetry. Ask Your Mama, 12 Moods for Jazz, by Langston Hughes, which he told me he wrote at Newport, Newport Jazz Festival. And in the right corner of this is a whole details of music and visuals and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, liner notes.
Right, and Jesse Norman put this together at Carnegie Hall 2 years ago, and I went and saw it, and it was great. It was just as he would like it. It went to LA, and I believe it's a film or a video, something, because they said it was going to be done, and there was no way they would let that just go up in the air, and I'm sure that it was filmed and will be available if it's not already. I have no idea. Yeah, but Langston was very important to us. And of course, he included us in his really important anthology, The Poetry of the Negro.
Right.
And but this is one thing that was interesting. He did an anthology in 1964 called New Negro Poets USA, Indiana University Press, and it was reviewed in Time magazine, right? And so Time magazine took two of my lines called Days from Felix, Days, but it was in
before
the anthology first. Days puff, clouds puff, days something like that. Anyway, they the thing was, "Am I in the wrong slum?" was the kicker, right?
Yeah.
And anyway, they quoted this in two lines in Time magazine, man. So Ishmael would say, "He's in Time magazine," He famous, and like, I don't even have, I have a book, I don't even have a clue, right?
Yeah.
But it was so funny. It was kind of like, it was a big deal, I guess. But I kind of felt it was some kind of taunt because I didn't really have a handle on what that. It didn't seem to mean much of anything at the time.
Yeah.
But later on, I think Time magazine did a black issue in 1970 where Romeo Bearden had the cover with Jesse Jackson drawing, and they gave a great quote to the mayor of Harlem in there about it, So, anyway.
Yeah, yeah. So, Umbra becomes a magazine.
Mm-hmm.
How was it produced? I mean, what was the hands-on level of production?
That brings up another person. There's a guy named Steve Cannon who's still running an organization today called A Gathering of the Tribes, which is very reminiscent of Umbra, but as a progression. Mm-hmm. And it is also a place where a lot of people kind of congregate, some from the old days and a lot from the new days. So he has interns and he sponsors poets. I mean, he was very helpful with Tracy Morris, Carl Hancock Rux. A lot of young writers came. Steve helped them, and he does it with painters. And this is a thing with Steve, and he's very good with young people. He retired from Medgar Evers, and he lost his sight to glaucoma, but he still does all this stuff. And he's from New Orleans also.
Yeah.
And so he knows Tom Dent, and Tom Dent knows him, and because all those people know each other,
Yeah.
So Steve was into printing, and he would do all of our posters.
Yeah.
And then we had a guy named Bill Day, who was a printer, And so they would take care of this. And we knew this guy named Rashid the Prepolis, who was a typesetter, because you had to type then back in those days. But they had these machines. And this guy named Art Berger, who was the white member, the official white member of the group, who wrote the first magazine piece about us called Negroes with Pens. And it was in the
Don't give them pens.
and it was in the old Mainstream magazine, which was came out of Masters of Mainstream magazine.
Yeah.
And on the cover was a drawing by Charles White of a blues singer. So and it was so here we are, this article, and he quotes a bunch of poets, and we were very much involved in the civil rights movement in the South. So a lot of poems about that, but Ishmael has a poem, I Do, Calvin Hurt and Tom Dent. And he kind of talked about, the whole thing. So that was kind of launched us in terms of, but Art Berger was also a printer, right? He was in the union.
Yeah.
So we had these people who had a lot of expertise who was very helpful, because that meant that we didn't have to really be obsessed with production and stuff. We could just give it to them and they'd take care of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Last night you were saying a little bit about civil rights movement and actions that you were involved in, activities. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. So because after Umbra went through a transformation, we put out a few publications, and then we split up. People went different places. Tom Dent went to the South. Calvin Herndon went along with a contingent from the Lower East Side, including Dr. Joe Burke, MD. John Keyes, the poet Zabo, and some others. They went to England. And Calvin Herndon and Dr. Joe Burke worked on the book, The Marijuana Papers. You should bring that back, right? This must be way ahead of its time. Because I think they published that in the late 60s. Mm-hmm. And Lorenzo went into the military, became an officer and went to Vietnam, and then he came back and stayed in the South, in Houston.
Yeah.
So people, I think Askil Muhammad Touré went with the Black Nationalists, because there was a group who went with Amiri Baraka. And they went uptown to Harlem, and then they had some trouble, but we had a guy in our group, Joe Johnson, who was the nephew of Bumpy Johnson, who's a well-known head honcho gangster in Harlem. If you ever saw this film that stars I'm sorry. No, yeah, thank you. Denzel, American Gangster. This is about a guy named Frank Lucas, who some people. It was based on a magazine article, an interview he gave for somebody in the Village Voice. I think it's a terrible film, and many people dispute the facts of the film. You know, because he said he was Bumpy Johnson's driver, and some people said no. But this guy, Frank Lucas, he told on his whole family. They all got arrested and put in jail, right? And but whereas Bumpy Johnson died a natural death, and didn't have to betray any of his family anyway. So Bumpy Johnson was a very important figure in many ways in the history of Harlem. I think that Larry Fishburne made and Bill Duke made another film about them that's probably close to the truth, and had Bumpy Johnson in that one, But anyway, Joe Johnson was the nephew of Bumpy Johnson. So Mary went up to Harlem, and he told me years later, it's in his memoirs also, that he didn't realize that they were in Harlem at the graces of Bumpy Johnson, who kind of protected them. Mm-hmm. So they thought they were doing all this, stuff, and Yeah. But a lot of us from downtown would not go up there. I mean, we'd go up and help him there. We'd read, and Joe Overstreet helped him to build the stage, and Sun Ra, who lived in the Lower East Side also, and was our spiritual leader, would go up there and play, and but there was this whole group of people who from downtown who went up there, and at the end of the day, they came back downtown. Because, look, I'm from Harlem. I know that you just don't go in there like that. But Emir is from Newark, so he eventually wound up going to Newark, where he knew the runnings, and he was very successful, I think, in Newark.
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered the question.
Yeah, well, last night you were talking about being down south during the civil rights actions.
Right. People went all around, and I got a chance to go down and be with the Free Southern Theater, which was, they were taking plays all over the South, putting it on before rural audiences, and it wasn't just the people in these towns who had never seen theater, but it was also the people who were working in the movement, who it would raise their spirits to come through and see a play, and and we do several plays, and I'd do a poetry play, we would do poetry, and and we also had the information, right? Some of which you could only give by word of mouth, and I think the same is true today, especially now, even more so. So we went all over out of New Orleans, and a lot of people in show business supported the Free Southern Theater, and actually there's several books. There's one called, I think, FST, which is about the Free Southern Theater, which has the whole story in there, including poems, everything. It's a great book. But one of the some people who were involved, Gil Moses, Denise Nicholas, who went on to become a TV and movie star, played Bill Cosby's wife in several films. But I remember one time we were coming out of Dawson, Georgia, which is a notoriously Klan enclave, and we got stopped by these, cops. And we had a caravan, with several cars. And it looked very bad, but then, of course, this car cruised by, black car with guys with hats on, and these these were the Deacons for Defense, and they didn't stop. They pulled off up there on the road and didn't get out of the car, just stood there, and the cops saw them, and of course the cops were the Klan. They saw them and they just got in their vehicles and drove off.
So and that's they were there to protect you guys.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this is a point about the movement that people, Martin Luther King said this is a nonviolent movement, but Paul Williams, I forgot his name, the guy who Robert Williams, Negroes with Guns, which we had as an ad in the first issue of Umbra. He wrote a book, Negroes with Guns. He was an NAACP, head of NAACP in the South, in the Carolinas, I believe, and he believed that people should arm themselves for self-defense, as Malcolm X did. They framed him, and he got run out of town, out of the country. And also a woman named Mae Mallory was also someone who actually stayed and went through the legal fight, but we had a defense fund for them, And then this whole idea of being self-defense, the Deacons for Defense were that, but they did not publicize it, But Malcolm X, did, but they were there. And I think that Yusef Komanyaka, the great poet, is writing an opera based on the Deacons for Defense. You know,
Fantastic.
so it'll be. I think it'll challenge Porgy and Bess. You know, at least. I'm obsessed with Porgy and Bess.
That's great. Do you want to talk about music a little?
Well, okay, what do you want to talk about? There's a lot of music to talk about.
When you all were getting set up and such, we were watching a video.
Oh God, that thing. There we are. That's me, all right.
Let's see it. Let's see
This
it.
is
We saw
David
it.
in 1975.
Y'all can watch it by yourselves. I can't stand it.
Performing for the Poetry Center at San Francisco State University. The band was called Ghetto Violence. Kelvin Keys was the guitarist. One of the Moffat family is on trumpet. His dad performed with Ornette Coleman for many years. Just a little bit, maybe. Yeah.
Well, they played the Mayor of Harlem. Oh, she's
Yeah.
doing it. The next one is Hail to the Chief, I think, right?
And I'm gonna do a song for you that's dedicated to the next presidential election. It's called
Here you go. Hail to the Chief. Bob Dylan could not do a role of singing like that.
Yeah, one of the things that I think.
Well, thank you, ladies, and thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
Soon to be on pay-per-view. Right.
I have to apologize for the quality of that video. It was made on this trip from a VHS tape as a dub, so we'll eventually have a better quality by going back to the master.
They have a mess, and he's going to take care of it so that it's going to be pristine quality. So he's going to look out for it.
Yeah. But I think, one of the things that is a little hard to grasp is just I think, you talk about, say, the English Renaissance as a time in world history when something was happening that didn't happen again. Mm-hmm. That was happening in the world of music and the arts in this country from that period, post-war period probably, through several decades. Just an immense wealth of incredible music that was right there and available,
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we get all our music through media now. It's like everybody's plugged in, and like I have tons of media, but it's like the live thing, the music that's being made by your neighbors. It's being made down the street. You can walk down the street on any given night and hear stuff that hasn't been performed before on the history of the planet. And I think that's a thing that differentiates our era from that time.
Well, good thing we're not that far past it. Maybe we can make an about face.
Yeah, and we can remember too. And David has recorded with a number of the fantastic musicians of our time in the era just before the present now. Ornette Coleman in 1971. You are the voice on the title poem Science Fiction.
That's a title poem. Okay.
Yeah. And you mentioned Sun Ra as a neighbor and spiritual leader. And so tell us a story about Love in Outer Space, and then we can listen to that.
Oh, we're going to listen to it, huh? Oh,
yeah,
boy.
we could listen to
That's
it.
a
But
surprise.
let's hear about it
It's
first.
like, this is your life. Well, you know, Sonny is just great. I mean, Sonny, I used to, you know, all these musicians, you know, people would hang out right downtown, and it was an area at the time where it was very different. It was very mixed, and you could just, it was very low. It didn't cost a lot of money. But anyway, Sonny, I would hear him lecture his musicians, and what he would tell them was so interesting that I would sit there and listen to him lecture these musicians, and he would keep them in shape. Anyway, he had all these records, and he would release them very often. And I went with him one time to where he had his records pressed, and went up to the Bronx, went to this warehouse, you know, and went up to this really mysterious, you know, foreboding place, banged on this door, you know, and somebody, the people come and let him into where they made bootleg records. And that's where he had his records pressed. You know, they had a record pressing plant, right?
Saturn.
Well, Saturn was out of Chicago, but
Okay.
it was a label. But some things he had didn't have a label at all. But Saturn was with Abe out of Chicago. It was a whole nother story.
Okay.
So one of those albums I played was an instrumental called Love in Outer Space. And it's a beautiful melody. Doom ba dan, doom ba da, doom. Oh, well, you hear it. Doom ba da. So anyway, I wrote lyrics to this song, to this melody, and sang them over a cassette recording, right? You know, very primitive stuff. And so I took it to him and I played it. He liked it. He said, "Oh, come on." He said, "Come on, we'll go down and we'll make a better tape, you know, like some kind of tape that people will be better than just this cassette, right?" So we went down to the studio and I sang it, you know, and I sang it and went on about my business. I think I went to, where did I go? I might have been to California. Didn't see him for a long time, maybe 4 years, 3-4 years, because they were in Europe a lot and stuff. Because, you know, we had brought him to California, by the way. When I was at Berkeley, we brought him the whole orchestra.
How that happened?
We brought them there to UC Berkeley, and it was great. They were in residence there.
He lectured?
He lectured. The Chancellor Bowker, who had been Chancellor at CUNY, called him a phantom. And Sonny loved it, you know. He's notorious, you know. He's famous. The Chancellor calls him a phantom, you know. But that was great. So Sonny wasn't, you know, I called him and said, we're waiting for you. He said, "Oh, okay." So they came out, and that's where they made the film, Space at the Place. There was some...
Yeah, in Oakland, yeah.
Yeah, the guy who put the money together lived in San Francisco. He was some rich guy, loved Sonny. This made the movie, and this is how amazing that was. They made the whole movie, released it, and then Sonny, there was some scene there, some kind of stupid kind of halfway sex scene, and Sonny said, "Look, let's take that out." And instead, in the whole middle of the film is now a concert footage. They played this whole set, which is brilliant. So the guy withdrew the movie, shot that thing, re-put it back together and released it again, and it was just great. So anyway, so when I came back after going to the studio with Sonny and making this tape, I come back from one time and I see them, finally meet them after 3 or 4 years, and they have this production number for Love in Outer Space. That's amazing, man. They have dances, they have processions, they have all these horns, and they do these takeoffs, and you know, from this, as I guess you're going to hear, this little tune of about 5 minutes, maybe 3-4 minutes. Yeah. They make like that a 20-minute production number. So
I got to see them a few times.
You
in
saw them?
Oakland and San Francisco. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. Shall we hear that?
Sonny was.
So here's David.
I don't know the instrument that is.
love everlasting reaches out to a lover like me again. Sunrise and
My shade. Yes, that's all I'm doing. I mean, this is not supposed to be a record. I don't care. Shit.
in its splendor, speak to me in metaphysical harmony.
That drum is almost a hip hop beat, you know?
I never said this is
Oh, Gilmore.
could be.
It's coming in.
That's a brilliant musician, man. Those guys can play, man.
Oh, no, some-
Here's Sonny.
Yeah.
There's love in its majesty. To the light
In the mystery. She's so thanks not to sing this, man. Louis Armstrong. You ever hear Louis Armstrong sing The Creator Has a Master Plan? That is the first.
Yeah, I've heard that Flying Dutchman.
everybody.
Oh, God.
Sunrise in outer space. Love for every face.
Oh, God, there's another. There's two songs. This is a great song.
It's really minimal, you know, like, there's not much, you know, it's a few instruments. Yeah.
More? No, I think it's gonna tag like this. I'm not gonna remember. Oh shit. That's
Big fan.
I see if it'll save it at some point. Yeah, thank you. If I thought we were going to make a record, I would have sang it a little bit more precisely. But I didn't think so. You didn't tell me. I said, no, this so we get an idea of, how the lyric goes, how people, it's a tactic.
Yeah.
It's an evil, tactic.
Yeah, I just, maybe we can open up for questions in a minute, but one of the things that I wanted to stress too is like, you've done a lot of work in radio and out in the Berkeley area, KPFA FM, Pacifica Network. You were one of the founders of something called the Third World Department.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, me and Barry, we had a strike at Pacifica. No one told, it's not in the history of Pacifica, it's the funniest thing. But we had a strike, and it was the Third World Communications Group, which was Asians, Latinos, blacks, who had this Third World Communication. Berto Vargas, who would later become the first secretary to the U.S. from Nicaragua because he was a Sandinista, and Berto Vargas and Alejandro, they put together a magazine with Sandino on the cover, right? And they organized this group that would eventually go to Nicaragua, and he talks about this, that there were like 200 guys from the Mission District on this hill, and they had no weapons and nothing. And so, okay, we're gonna take over. We're gonna do this, So they won, right? So I'll go in with Berto, and I have a poem to me about Neo California, but I'm with Berto and in in D.C. and they have the embassy and Somoza, all of Somoza's artwork and stuff on the wall, but all these young people have taken over. And for the first time I see that there's all these black people from South America that I didn't even know this, right? And apparently the whole coast of South America on the Atlantic
East
side.
Coast, yeah.
Yeah. Are all these black people. And I didn't know this, but I found out, right? And so this embassy, they were running the embassy, and I would go to Berto's house for dinner, and you got the uniformed Secret Service outside his house, guarding his house, right? And I said, wow, this is really something, man. It was happy, it was fun. But anyway, Third World Communications was a group that consisted of all these people, and we said, well, look, I did work for KPFA when years ago I did did an interview with the Black Panthers from Berkeley High School, right? So these are high school Black Panthers, which is and but they didn't have any black people, in there at all, and they were representing, as liberals, or progressives, they were representing 4 black people, and that was just ridiculous, and and it came to pass, we had a little strike, there was a little thing, then it was okay, and we came in the Third World Department. Barry and I stayed at the station. The other group went out to East Oakland. They wanted to be in the community.
And
Barry Scott, who's a very successful producer. Another, but anyway, the point about this is that KPFA had been struggling at that before that. And when we brought these new people in, they prospered. They did very well. They had their membership increased to the point where we were able to build from scratch a station and buy some property right along Luther King Way and build a whole structure. Instead of renting over Edie's, stupid, rental for too much, they're able to own property and rent to other people. I mean, it was great. So we did the Third World Department. I think it turned out really well. We trained a lot of people, got some people from the community to be journalists who didn't go to journalism school. They just were trained by the news department, who, by the way, trained almost everyone who's in the news business in the Bay Area. Radio, television comes through KPFA because they let people train doing tape and interviews and the whole thing. So when there was a crisis at Pacifica, because some people wanted to sell it and stuff, and there was a huge strike at Berkeley, which was the turning factor that allowed Pacifica to remain what it was. And the people were getting arrested, but everybody in all the news stations in the Bay Area supported the strike. I mean, there was because everybody was a part of that, right? Had been a part of Pacifica. So that was like a very cool thing.
Yeah, that still happens. I have a couple students that have gone on to write for them. They're writing stories, and they're running some of the news, the evening news,
It's great. Yeah. It's a great institution, gosh.
Yeah, and David made a beautiful 2-hour documentary on Bob Kaufman, radio documentary called Bob Kaufman, Poet. One of your works for radio. And should we see if there are questions from the audience?
Well, before, I did a few others.
Yeah.
One was that Ted Jones gave a talk on the Black Beats at the San Francisco Art Institute. He did one called Hear No Evil, which I don't know why it was, but we interviewed all these right-wing people, right? And they were shocked. Phyllis Schlafly and some others, they were shocked that we would actually approach them. And so they were very nice. And so this is like a really unique, thing, And I did interviews and stuff, and we did outreach in the community, So anyway, that's that.
Yeah.
Pacifica.
So questions, please.
What time is it?
It must be almost time to wind up. Yeah, 5:30.
It's 5:30 now?
Yeah.
If you have any questions, you better hurry up, because we got to get out of here. We don't have all day, Okay, well, I should ask you all some questions then.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, that's that.
Thank you all for being here.
Huh?
If anybody wants to see some photos,
This is Lou Watts. In my hair.
posters.
Oh, you have to get over
quick, David.
Excuse me?
An autograph.
Oh, sure. How do you, let me spell your
Vintage posters.
R-A-B-E-C-C-A. B-E-C-C-A. Perfect.
B.
B-R-O-W-N. Last name is
Okay.
It's a great talk. Nice work there.
Yeah, that's in Berkeley.
Yeah, it's in really good condition.
Yeah.
Really nice. My questions are, do you have any of these shirts left? And B, can I borrow them?
Yeah, right.
Any of the what? Shirts.
Posters.
Oh my goodness.
That's 76.
Loving the
That's when that
hair.
tape
I'm
was
loving
made.
the shades.
That performance was
Loving it all, man. The 70s were the
It
best.
was in a file folder. We looked at it for 35 years.
Yeah.
But I mean, even then, it's so much. Yeah. It's like a year older. Yeah.
Yeah, is this from the files?
That's a brim. What is that?
Oh no!
I've been there.
I wrote maze.
That's okay.
I'm gonna write over
No,
it.
that's good. That's good. It'll be even more have more quirky incidents to it.
This shows you how out of it I am, right? I think I'm in maze.
So there's food.
Okay. Food?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
See you over there.
Where you get those books from?
Is that the air that I'm thinking
Where
of?
my Felix is.
Air?
Not the band. That's your one.
No, air is.
Sorry.
Yeah.
It's A.I.
Usually I'm not paranoid, but somebody ran off
It means artist in residence. It's the thing of the loft thing. It used to be if you were an artist and you lived in loft, if you got AIR status, you could stay there and you couldn't be thrown. It's no longer used, but you still see some old signs.
you know.
You know, this is yours?
No, it's here.
I'm gonna sign it. Okay,
I'm gonna give you mine later. I'm gonna get the mayor of Harlem. It's like,
well, knock yourself out. You know, tell me your name again.
Mike.
Michael.